It is my great pleasure to be here this morning and to have the opportunity to talk to so many wonderful folks about, as has already been said, arguably one of the most important issues in our country. And to do it in a way that I hope will help us get to a point where we can talk about these issues, diversity issues, race issues, more frequently, more eloquently, more fluently, and also with a number of principles and characteristics that we're going to talk about today. So I have, as any good speaker would, way more content than I'll ever be able to cover. And that's great because I have no intentions of covering it all. I'm going to cover as much as we need to inspire, to activate, to energize, to do all those things, and then some this morning, and then to use this as a launching pad, as it were, for the rest of the day, because my assignment is not to do everything, because that's what the whole day is designed to do. But there's even work after today, and we're going to talk about that. What is a conference? And I have a couple of points there. But before I go too far into the content of my speech, a round of applause for your dean, please, for that gracious introduction. And what makes that a gracious introduction, apart from the fact that it was good and it was it highlighted some accolades throughout my career, was it was like me, short. And so anyone who takes the privilege to cut my bio down to just a couple of sentences is a good friend of mine, and something that I greatly enjoy, because there's absolutely no reason to lose 30 minutes of my time with you listening to the things I used to do, the things I've done in the past. And I love one part of my bio that we should update, and that is that I was named one of the nation's sort of leading new scholars in the field, one of the top new scholars in his field, although I'm now 10 years old in my field. So when I wrote that sentence, it was true, but I guess we have to update it. What do you do when you were once the emerging person in the field and no longer? So I do thank you for that. I want to thank Lisa also for her introductory comments, and I want to echo something that this is not something I anticipated, but embedded in Lisa's comments, she talked about the word commitment. You'll hear it again. And then embedded in Tom's comments was the word courage. You'll also hear that again later. I don't know how in the world they saw my PowerPoint, because I didn't release it before, but it's okay. It just simply means that there's confirmation of what we're going to talk about. But before I get into the main crux of my talk, I'm also joined today by several folks who work with me in the Center for Higher Education Enterprise, and I'm lucky to have them on my team. So first, but in no particular order, just around the room, is Dr. Derek Tillman Kelly, who is Special Assistant to the Director at CHI, also the University Innovation Alliance Fellow, and has been not only my former doctoral advisee, but he's been on my team probably now for about a decade. I'm just kidding, maybe about 4 or 5 years, but he helps me do the work that we're doing, so thank you, Derek, for being here this morning. Across the room toward the back is Tiger Leetom, who is a research assistant in the Center for Higher Education Enterprise and also works with the director's office in providing support there, because I need a lot of support. And so thank you. And by the way, Tiger, they have, I think, 3 or 4 t-shirts out there. And it's so funny because I give a lot of race talk. So I just asked Tiger, this was a really important activity for him, to buy me as many Black Lives Matters t-shirts as he possibly could find. And, you know, rightfully so, charge them all to my credit card. But I didn't know that the College of Social Work had its own t-shirt. So I want you to go out there and make sure that any t-shirt that we have not already ordered that we buy today, and you can still use my credit card to do so. So thank you, Tiger, for that. But I want to support the College of Social Work, and I also want to support your swag because they're really cool t-shirts. So the rest of you in here should also get one as well. And then the newest addition to our team, who is our communication specialist, is Alicia Howard, who's here. And I think Alicia's probably coming up on maybe the end of first month with CHI. And so round of applause for all of my CHI team members, please. Center for Higher Education Enterprise is a research and policy center here at Ohio State. We are committed to student success. And our work on student success, we organize in 4 priority areas. First of those is college access. It's real easy. We just believe that college should be accessible to everyone. Anyone who wants access to this precious commodity, this precious experience called higher education should have access to it. And so we conduct research and policy work to make sure that we maintain accessibility in this country. Democratic country, democratic society ought to provide access to higher education for all of its citizens. And for us to do that, to keep college accessible, we got to keep it affordable. And for too many years and for too many reasons, the rising costs of college fall on the shoulders of students and parents. We believe that those costs should be shouldered by everyone who benefits. And it's already been embedded in the opening comments that we benefit from having an college-educated citizenry. So therefore, we might also share in the cost function. We conduct research and policy work to look at that function and to understand how to control it so that we can ensure accessibility but also quality. The third area is engagement. And our work on engagement, we sort of organize it twofold. First, we conduct research on student engagement. What happens when students are engaged in their learning experiences and their learning process? But also as a research center, we are unapologetically committed to being engaged in the work that we do. So it's not just conducting research and publishing reports that we put on the shelf, but we want to work with our partners. It's exactly why I fundamentally believe that I'm the perfect keynote speaker for you, because I ought to be with social work. I ought to be with the College of Law. I ought to be with the College of Medicine, because I, first of all, have the fortunate and the opportunity to direct the Center for Higher Education Enterprise. And the work of student success is not just the responsibility of the faculty member in the classroom. Success, largely defined, student success is connected to larger notions of success. And if anyone should be concerned about the success of society, I fundamentally believe it ought to be those of us who have the fortunate opportunity to work in anything related to social work, connecting with others. So our work on engagement moves us out to work with our partners. And then finally, the fourth area is excellence. And the foundation of everything we do is to ensure excellence in education, but excellence largely in society. And so we're going to talk about that today. Chi used to be located in the Glenn College of Public Affairs over in Page Hall, and about, I guess, a month ago maybe, we moved to Ohio Stadium. So next time you're at a football game, remember us. After the football game or after the tailgate, before or after, stop by Chi and get some research. I mean, what better thing to mix together than a tailgate and student success research, right? All right, so let's get started. And I want to start with a story. So I just told my class, I teach a course this semester called Critical Race Theory in the College of Education. And I just told my class that as a social scientist who was trained in quantitative methods, who worked with statistics well before he ever thought about interviews, I find it almost exciting and paradoxical too that I'd spend so much time telling stories because I thought that people wanted my data, and I thought that people were moved by really fancy graphs. And they are in the moment, but about a day later, none of you can recall any of the statistics that I will probably share with you. What people remember most are your stories. What people remember most are the lives of people who are touched by our work, which is exactly what drove many people to the field of social work in the first place. And so I began with the story about someone who's finally shorter than I am, and that is my son. He'll grow up and be taller than me. It's very easy to do. My son often is asks me a question, and his question is, where are you going now? And we'll talk about this in the keynote. Where are you going now? Now for my son is not a reference to temporality or time. It's not where are you going in this moment. It actually is his signal of frustration. So the way he articulates it is not where are you going now, it's where are you going now? Because as a public speaker, public intellectual, one who is committed to translating scholarship into practice and policy, I get to travel a lot. I go a lot of places and I speak a lot of places, and I enjoy it most days. But my son gets frustrated sometimes with it. Where are you going now? You were just in DC. Oh, I say I'm in Missouri. Why are you in Missouri? Oh, where are you going today? I'm going to Oklahoma. Where are you going now? I'm going to LA. Where are you going now? I'm in Columbus. Oh, are you going to be at Chi? No, I had to give a talk on campus. For what? He asks. I say, it's a conference. It's a conference by the College of Social Work. It's called the Community Engagement Conference. And he said, I thought you just spoke at a conference last week. I thought you spoke at a conference. Actually, didn't you speak at 2 conferences last week? How many conferences are y'all going to have? I remember the first time my son articulated that, I sort of laughed it off like most of us will. And as I packed my bag to prepare to go to this really large summit in DC, I thought about the provocativeness of his word. He actually provoked some thinking in me that I hadn't really considered before. So I want to talk about that today. We want to have a real talk about race and everyday interactions. But what I hope I do in the time I have with you is to talk about race and what this conference must do today for us to really engage the community effectively tomorrow. And tomorrow is just a simple reference to after the conference. Could be tonight. Someone might actually be provoked to do something for the community during the conference. But the conference must do something today for us to effectively engage the community afterwards. Otherwise, this is not really a conference. And I'll tell you why. Because my son's question about conference led me to consider a couple things. What's the purpose of all of these meetings? Why are we here at 9 o'clock on is it Friday? Friday morning. And how will people know in a couple of months that we had this conference? Who will be the beneficiaries of what we cover today? So if you're on social media, please continue to use the hashtag CSWCEC15. My Twitter name, social media name is TL Strayhorn on most sites. And my center is Chi_OSU. But if we're ever going to get to the point we have to get to today in this conversation, we had to first start off with the definition. So I said, Tion's right, that's my son. He's right about a lot of things. I don't tell him that all the time, but don't you tell him. But he's right. We got to think about conference. And the definition of the word conference is really interesting if you look it up. If you've never done it, here it is on the screen. A conference is simply a formal conversation or discussion. A conference is a formal conversation or discussion that takes place over a number of days or number of hours, and it involves people with shared interests and values. Once you bring people together over a period of time who have shared interests and shared values, you're on your way towards having a conference. But it's not yet completely a conference. It's not a conference until that gathering is to talk about something. It's got to have a purpose. It's a purposeful conversation. It's a conference. Purposeful conversation that takes place over a period of time amongst people who share interest and values is on its way to conference, but conference is not conference until we have a formal interchange of views. We have to do something, exchange perspectives. And I hope we'll find that we are not the same. We have some shared interest and values that's necessary for conference to happen. By the same token, we have different views on certain matters, different views today on issues of diversity, specifically race. And there must be an exchange of those views. And the meeting, the conference, is so that we can adjust our differences and ultimately reach consensus. Finally, the meeting is with intention to reach a desired end or change. So if at the end of the day, we don't reach consensus and we don't change, nothing happens, everything goes back to the way it was before 9 o'clock today, we have failed at having a conference. But the moment we reach consensus, something change, a mindset change, a belief change, a stereotype change, then we are off to conference. How many of you in here have heard the stereotype that professors are, generally speaking, older white men? So, Dean Toms introduced me and said that I'm a professor in the College of Education in Human Ecology in the Department of Educational Studies. I direct the Center for Higher Education Enterprise. I have appointments in a lot of different departments, and I'm a professor, and I'm not an old white man. So there's one stereotype that you can change immediately, that not all professors are old white men. In fact, some professors are good-looking, black, short men, right? I've been this size since kindergarten. I'm comfortable with it. I mean, literally, I bought this blazer in like the first grade. It served me well. Those kind of things are things we have to get out of the way. We have to be comfortable talking about it. I identify not just as a short male, but I'm a short black male. And I've been this race my entire life. And the world has understood me as black my entire life. Before I understood myself as black, the world understood me as black. My mother, when I was smaller, believe it or not, than this, she said to me one day, she said, listen, I was about 6 or 7, she said, you're black. And that gave me the language for describing why I was a different color from those people in my classrooms. She gave me that language. She said, you're a black young male living in a white man's world. That's what she told me in my bedroom. And I thought, I don't know what that means, but it sounds like I'm different. We're going to talk about difference. And what she told me was a really powerful lesson. She said to me, because of this, you are going to have to work twice as hard and you will only get half as much. And I've always been good at math and I've always loved numbers. It's probably what led me to statistics in the first place, and I thought that seems inequitable. I didn't know the language of inequity at 7, but I thought work twice as hard as others but get half as much. But before I understood what that meant, I received these messages, and it shaped how I showed up in the classroom. It shaped how I engaged people who were different from me. It shaped how I made meaning of experiences and encounters. If the conference doesn't bring us together to talk openly about these things, where are these messages coming from? Who gave them? My mom's a wonderful person. My mom's the best person in my whole, without her, I couldn't have life. But regardless, my first lesson about race, I remember powerfully, came from my mom. So when I started realizing that race mattered and that race was different, my mom gave me that message. There were other people who reinforced, there were people who challenged, there were people who affirmed those messages over the course of time. If we can never get to a point where we can exchange these messages, exchange these bins of knowledge, then the conference has not fulfilled its purpose. The conference brings us together for the formal exchange of these ideas, but ultimately it's not just about breathing on each other and talking at each other. It's about reaching consensus about some things. We will agree to some stuff today. Some things we will agree to. But it's not about that. We will adjust some differences. Some things that we thought we were wildly different on, we realize we're not really that different about. But ultimately, in the end, we've got to come to committed change. So I want to talk about some of that. And in building on this whole notion of race and definitions, I want to give you the definition of the word race. It's one that's really interesting if you look it up. The word race is defined in the dictionary as a population within a species that is distinguished in some way from others by sharing certain distinctive physical traits. Also, a group of people descended from common ancestry. There's that word again, common. We'll come back to these C words. Common ancestry. And the one that I love the most, because we use it a lot in this country, is that race is a social construct. It's a social construct, meaning that it is not, it has no biological significance. Is not determined biologically, but socially in our interactions, we create it, we construct it. Race is a social construct used to categorize or to define people. What are your thoughts about this? Race is a social construct. Does that mean that race is not real? Absolutely not. And no. You want to say something more about that? Doesn't have to exist, but it does. And the thing that gets in the way of the conversation that we're having now, and the conversation you'll have in the breakout sessions and the rest of the day, is that we often misinterpret this word, social construct. Lots of people say social construct. It means it's not real. It doesn't really have to, it doesn't matter because it's not, we constructed it. But the other part about social construct is who's the we who constructed it. And a lot of times people, the reason why white people don't enjoy these conversations because these conversations often proceed with putting the responsibility for race and racism on white people. It also then exonerates people of color from ever being racist or having racist perspectives or using race to their own advantage, right? And so once you feel responsible for something, if you're like my kids, they just, there's no reason to feel responsible for anything. You break something, you say, oh my gosh, did you break it? No, it jumped out at me. I thought I asked you not to eat the cookies. They looked so good, how could I resist? We can always explain away our responsibility, but ultimately, it's our shared responsibility. What makes it a social construct is that all of us, those of us in this room, those of us without this room, those of us who are dead, those of us who are alive, are all responsible for the meaning that is attached to race in this country. It's in our we often say this, it's in the fabric of society. And that's kind of misleading, because when you say fabric of society, people don't really know what that means. This is fabric. This is what people think of when we think of fabric. When I say fabric, it's in every single system, institution. It's in our policies. It's in our practices in ways that are conscious and unconscious. And if we're ever going to reach consensus and change, we've got to own that collectively, but we also have to move beyond that guilt feeling to empowerment, that we can actually do something to change it and control it and manage, because you simply cannot fix something you're unwilling to face. This is why people say things like, wow, I can't believe we've been fighting racism for so long in this country and it's still a problem. Because we really have not faced up to the problem of race and racism in this country. And until we face it, we can't fix it. It's impossible to fit. And I'm talking to people always say this is like preaching to the choir. The good news about that is I'm a choir director and I love preaching to choirs. And so if you're a person who says, you know what, I believe that, I think this is exactly what I tell my clients, that's great. And that's what you got to tell your clients. That's what you got to tell the students you work with. That's what you must tell the families and the adults you work with. But in society, it's what we must tell each other. We can never fix it if we don't face it. And we won't face it until we develop the language, the words, the scripts for having the conversation. I told someone the other day on the plane, 7A, I was sitting in 7A. It's one of my favorite seats on the plane, because usually it's the one, these small planes where there's like one row and then there's 2 rows across the aisle. So I like 7A just because 7's a really nice number, and it's A because, I don't know, I'm too short to be in C. And so 7A, and that means that I get to sit by myself and no one will talk to me. And then across the aisle is 7B, as I'm talking to this gentleman in 7B across the aisle, and he says something to me, he says, oh my gosh, look at her. And I said, who? He said, that woman. He points to this woman who's a raced being. We'll come to race beings in a moment. And I said, what's up? And he said, look at how she's dressed. He doesn't know me from a can of paint, but he decides to have a conversation, because even 7A will not get you away from having conversations with strangers. Because in this country, we engage people all the time across aisles when we want to. It's interesting how we use that, right? We are willing to engage people when we want to talk about other people, but we're unwilling to engage each other when we want to talk about thorny issues. Now you sound like a church. That sounds good. I like that. Respond to me. All right, because remember, I'm preaching to the choir. And so this guy in 7B says, look at her. And I said, by the way, she could be my mom. She's not black, but as Ann just helped us, we got to stop getting outside this idea that, whenever I walk with another black male, we're both dressed up, people say, are you guys brothers? Absolutely not. I don't even know him, really. We just happen to both be dressed up. We can never fix it if we don't face it. But we make these assumptions. 2 people who look alike, 2 people of the same race. But nowadays we got to get outside that mindset, because people actually don't live lives like that anymore. We created it. By 2015, the projected population of this country will be just under 400 million. This country. And 54% of that population is expected to be ethnic minorities. And ethnic minorities will no longer include just the 5 categories that we used to talk about, but it include multiracial and biracial folks. It's also estimated that about 13% of this population or more identify as LGBT people, LGBTQ people. And that acronym, I was on a train in New York and I had a nice blazer on. This guy said, I like your blazer. And I was listening to his conversation, because once you tell me you like my blazer, that gives me the license to listen to your conversation. And so I was listening to his conversation. He said, he was talking to his friend. He said, oh my gosh, I go to Georgetown. I'm in New York. He goes to Georgetown. He's on the train. And he says, I'm the president of the LGBTQIAA squared club. I wouldn't dare lean over and say, excuse me, what does it all mean? Because I actually know what that means. But when I've told this story, people say, at my Q&A, they say, by the way, what does it mean? And it simply means, if you're not keeping up, that LGBT is like a term of the old. It misses over half of our non-heterosexual population in this country. The country that we've created, that we've opened up access, that we've wanted, the diversity that we've wanted is here. It's in the classroom, it's in colleges, it's in universities, it's in families, but yet we still operate according to these very categorical definitions of race. And we use it. We created it as a social construct because it allows us to categorize and define people. It allows the man in 7B to say, look at her, who he does not know my relationship with, and say, look at how she's dressed on the plane. And as a result of that, I then decided, usually what happens when someone who is racist speaks to me, or someone who's sexist speaks to me, or someone who's homophobic speaks to me like that, I have to fit in that I'm a professor. And I have to fit in the nature of my work. So I start saying things like, well, you have no idea what, I tell people all the time, I met a stripper on a plane one time. And the reason why that's really important is because when I saw her, I didn't know she was a stripper, because strippers don't actually have name tags that say stripper. So I met this woman on a plane who's sitting beside me, and she's smiling, and I smile at people too. And she wasn't ugly, so don't judge me. I was looking at her and smiling, and I didn't know what was going on in this plane. And so she comes over, she sits beside me, she has a tiger paw on her left shoulder. And I'm like, that's a really interesting tattoo. And she starts talking to me about Magic City. And I thought this was an amusement park. And so I told her, I said, oh my God, I love amusement parks. This is the best thing in the world. She said, well, we were on our way to Atlanta, Georgia. And she said, well, when you get there, you ought to go. And I said, I'm going to go. I love having fun at amusement parks. And then she finally told me, that's not an amusement park. And because you're laughing, you know what it is. And she tells me her occupation. And I judged her. Because I grew up in a family where not only my mother told me that I'm a black guy living in a white man's world, but I've also grown up in a family where religion is really important. And Christian faith is a marker of my cultural background. And so I listen to leaders, people in authority, people who were built, called to help people, like pastors and mentors, tell me that I should make judgments about people who are strippers because strippers are bad people. And then I met a stripper who caused cognitive dissonance for me, 35,000 feet up in the air, because I got ready to judge her. And I said, how did you get into that line of work? And she said, I have kids, and I have to make a living, and I have no education. So I use my best assets to make a living for myself. I'd never heard it explained to me that way. How can you judge someone? Because guess what? It's not her fault that she doesn't have access to education. She gave me her whole story, how she missed it, how she had to grow up fast because of the family that she was born into. And it's not her fault, because I bet you as a little embryonic growth in her mom, she didn't say, hey mom, dad, grow up in a low-income neighborhood. Raise me in a low-income neighborhood. I've never met a single kid in this country who says, you know what I really want to do? I really want to be poor. That's what I really want to do, is grow up poor. People don't choose poverty. The poverty in this country, which is also racialized, is a problem. And it shapes not just the experience growing up, that in fact there's a lifetime of inequities that accumulate and intersect and create a very unique experience for them, but also a very challenging set of circumstances. I am a professor of education, and so I often talk about this through the lens of education. If you think about a young student, in this country we spend a lot of time talking about black men. Think about a young black male who's born into poverty. Born into poverty, simply born to parents who didn't have access to education, and because of that have jobs that have lower occupational status. They don't have competitive salaries. They probably don't have health care benefits. And if they have them, they're temporary, right? And this young person is born to that family. Well, we know this in this democratic society, that schools are funded based on the local income tax base. So by being born simply to that set of families, those parents, and then raised in that neighborhood, that student will attend a school that gets less funding than the school that I attended. When I grew up and went to high school, by the time I got to 10th grade, almost all of my teachers were doctors. My AP history teacher, Dr. Mitchell. Physics, Dr. Shin. Organic chemistry, Dr. Tricano. I thought everybody went to schools where their teachers were doctors with earned doctorates. And it wasn't until I started becoming a professor where I realized, or actually in college, where I started meeting people, exchanging these views with people, that I realized, wow, there are a lot of inequities in this country. And this black male born to these impoverished parents who grows up in poverty is zoned, not because they choose, but zoned to go to a school that's going to have lower resources, less qualified teachers, because qualified teachers don't choose to go to those kinds of schools. And as a result, he will be learning from people who will be teaching outside their field, if they're teaching at all. Now, if they teach my son's going to insist upon a good education. That's why teachers don't like him. No, seriously, they don't. Because in this country, we've set up an educational system, especially the K-12 level, especially in impoverished, are you knocking on tables because you're getting ready to be excited? In impoverished neighborhoods, where teachers get to do the bare minimum and get by. And my son, he can't stand when substitute teachers don't teach and follow the lesson. So what he does is he asks his teacher, who's going to say, okay, so tomorrow I'm going to be out. My son will ask the teacher before or after school, what are we supposed to do tomorrow? And the teacher will say, oh, you're supposed to go over a worksheet and then you're going to have a quiz and then I want you to watch a video. And then the substitute will come, do what they're going to do, and the very next day my son will tell the teacher, you know what, that substitute came and they did not follow the lesson. We did not watch a video. We did not take a quiz. They sat here the whole time and let us joke. And he tells, and what happens is teachers go to teachers' lounges and say, do you have that Strayhorn kid? Let me tell you, don't send any bad substitutes that way because he's going to tell, and if you don't do anything about it, he's going to tell his dad and tell his mom. Before you know it, the principal's going to be complaining. And actually, we want kids who are so engaged in their learning that they demand nothing more than a good quality education. But we actually have set up a school system where those kind of kids are not liked by teachers, especially if they're a black person of color and if that intersects with race, because the teachers don't believe. So I tell them all the time, they say things like, your son is amazing. He's not amazing, he's just smart. Your son is incredible. No, he's not. Just little. Right? Because this idea of exceptionality is rooted in racism. The notion that a young black male couldn't be academically oriented. Can't fix it if we can't talk about it. So we illustrate talking about it by using the language ourselves. So in 2012, I wrote this book about belonging. I actually didn't think I was going to be able to talk about belonging in this talk, but as my thoughts started forming, I think it's absolutely essential, partly as a backdrop to some of the racial disparities I'm talking about with this fictitious young black male born to a low-income family, but also because I think what we're talking about with respect to race ultimately connects with belonging. And social work is also connected with needs. So in 2012, I wrote this book about college students' sense of belonging. It's the basis of my 2012 TED Talk. And in the book, I amassed lots of data over several pages. Things like, I start with this premise that everybody wants to succeed. I say students in my book, but it's true that most people in this country want to succeed. And if you're a person who believes, or you've allowed society and the forces of society to lead you to believe that some people don't want to succeed, that some people don't want success, that some people don't want the American dream, that's the change that must occur as a result of this conference. I've not met a single person in this country who says, Dr. Strayhorn, I woke up this morning looking to fail. I went to work this morning hoping that I could lose my job. Well, now, it all depends, kind of, right? Most people don't want to lose their job. They might want another job, or they want to get a job somewhere else. But it's true that most people don't want to fail. Most people want to succeed. But we have to also understand that there's a relationship between success and failure. Right? And so those of us who are in helping professions like social work have to help people understand that, yes, success is the goal. And sometimes success will begin with failure. The absence of failure is not success. It's what you do with failure that leads to success. And there are lots of people in this country, especially race beings. I've met too many, so much that it breaks my heart, people of color who say things like, I don't believe that education pays off. I say it does. I have data and charts to prove it. And they say, no, you don't understand. I don't believe it because in my family, I have an aunt who has a college degree and she's been looking for a job for 3 years. How do you keep people holding on for hope and optimistic about the things that we fundamentally believe in this room when we deal with the realities of race every day? The realities of race are shown here. Let me show you this. So let's take a student, the average black student who's an honor student, has a 3.0 in high school GPA, in high school, who enters a predominantly white institution like Ohio State. This is the kind of data that's in that belonging book, right? So 3.0, high school, black student, enters a predominantly white institution. Doing nothing at all. Their predicted GPA is a 2.7. 3.0 in high school, enter college, it drops to a 2.7. You're like, no, that can't be right. It is, I bet you. No, it is right. Let me tell you why. Because what we don't often think about, and when I say we, I'm talking about me too. Like I used to write as if students as race beings weren't also existing in raced institutions, right? So just because you had a 3.0 in high school and have all the I get it all the time. Everywhere I go, people say, well, Dr. Strayhorn, don't you think academic preparation matters? Absolutely, it matters. Students who are not academically prepared for college won't succeed, but students who are academically prepared for college are not guaranteed to succeed either. It depends on who they are and what the institution does. This is what happens when race beings enter predominantly white institutions that don't have conferences like this that start to help us unpack, because before you know it, they're learning from professors who have low expectations of people like them. They're also learning in departments where they never see themselves projected on the wall, on the faculty, in the curriculum, in the reading. They never have their own interest affirmed. Or there are faculty who are grading them who are not culturally competent enough to really be their effective instructor. What does that mean to be culturally competent? People say that all the time. Can you give me an example? Absolutely. So let me tell you my best example of this. It came out of my funded work from the National Science Foundation in STEM, and we were collecting data from survey data and interview data from students. And one student who's a computer scientist major helped me see it in a way that was so profound. He said, in computer science, one assignment that you get a lot of times is you learn how to program. And professors will ask you to write a program that will generate your family tree. So the student did that, took the assignment literally, went home and wrote a program that will generate his family tree. Turned it in, the professor gave him a C. The student went to the professor and said, why did I get a C on the assignment? What could I have done better? He said, well, first of all, your family tree is half done. You did half of the assignment. I said, build a family tree, you only have half of the tree. And the student told us in the interview, I only know half of my family. I have no idea my dad's side of the family. My dad's not been actively involved in my life. So how can I be responsible for building a side of the tree? He didn't say go find your family. He said write a program to build your family. So a professor has to have the cultural competence to look at that and say, maybe there's another reason for this. Maybe there's another explanation for this. Maybe this becomes fodder for conversation with the student, right? But rather than looking at it and telling the student once again that you now not only didn't do the assignment well, but something's wrong with you. You get a C on the assignment because you only know half of your family tree. Little does the professor know this is something the student's been struggling with and dealing with and learning how to manage all the time. It's why I think that social work is so important, because the work of social workers is not just when clients come to meet us or when families come to meet us. It's all the time. People need support. People need help all the time. That young man needed help in that classroom, and he told us in the interview, the problem is I didn't know what to say back to the professor. Like, I didn't even tell the professor, look, I didn't know my dad, because I don't want to put all my business out there. But how do you have that conversation? Because you can't fix what you won't face. So the professor also stays intact. Their understanding of the world isn't changed. Their cultural competence isn't increased because the student didn't have the language for having that conversation. How do we get to a point where students are empowered to have that conversation? So in the book, I talk about these data. So let's just look across the screen. If the student starts studying, their GPA goes up to about 2.8. If their student goes to faculty for help, their GPA does not drop, by the way. What happens is we think that students who have low GPAs are more likely to go get faculty help. It's usually those students who are struggling in classes who ask for assistance. It's also, by the way, those families who need support, who need social services, right there on the brink of emergency, who tend to come to us. But it's not when things are going well. It's not always that families and clients and young people reach out when things are going well. We have to change this in this country. I always say that, yes, people need to be help-seeking, but those of us who work in the helping professions need to be help-giving. That means we have to know people well enough to anticipate pitfalls, anticipate problems, so that we can offer assistance even before they know it's necessary, even before they know that they need it. Because quite often, I've learned more and more that people who need help don't always know it. They always don't know it. Sometimes they do. It's usually at the time of crisis or emergency, but sometimes we need people who will anticipate it, use data, use theory, use their very best judgment to anticipate the likelihood of risk and then offer help. So the student who starts to do these kind of things, if they start to, if they belong, their GPA jumps up to a 2.85. So let's talk about what belonging is. I say a whole bunch of stuff in the book. I won't say it all here. But the one thing I talk about in the book are the 7 elements of belonging. The first of these is that belonging is a basic human need. By the way, so too is safety. My center's doing work on foster youth of color. Ultimately, their trajectories into college. But I learned so much from this study. It's one of those things where, although I'm at the decade mark of my career, I realize more and more every day that I virtually know nothing at all about a lot of things. And that's okay, because if the conference is ever going to be effective, we've got to be comfortable saying what we know. and saying what we don't know, admitting where we're strong, admitting where we have some weaknesses that need to be managed. And that doesn't mean that I know nothing at all, but there are a lot of things I still don't know. For instance, we interviewed a young man who's an African-American male foster youth, who's then, at the time of the study, in college. And he starts to talk to me about when you're in college, there are certain periods of time where the campus closes. Most campuses, not all, but most. So the student's talking about his fear of breaks. And the reason why he fears breaks, he's from Chicago. His sister had an apartment, but something happens because his sister also has a number of challenges in her personal life. And as a result, she gets locked up. And she gets locked up for a long period of time to where she's not paying rent. And as a result, loses their home, the apartment. He's now in college. He certainly doesn't have the resources to take care of the apartment. Here's about to be a break in college. And during breaks, most of us go home. But he's worried because he doesn't have anywhere to go. So anticipating this months in advance, he says, you know what I did? I got a job. And most people, when you hear that, you think what? He got a job so he can buy a place, get an apartment, right? No, he got a job. He said, I got a job at Starbucks because that's the only place that would hire me. And I started saving every single paycheck. And as we got closer to the break, I just kept counting how much money I had. And I kept looking for any car that was on sale. And he found a really bad car it moved, but it wasn't great. It was, it kept most things out, but not all elements out. But he found a car, and he took all of the money he saved, and he bought a car. And most people now in this story think that he bought the car because he had to get to work, or he bought the car so he could go to Chicago so he could get to his sister's apartment. No, he said, you know what I did during that break? I parked my car at Giant Eagle and I slept. I lived in the car because a car is cheaper than an apartment. I never thought about it because I don't live the life. I'm privileged to not think about these things. But I think that's important to share as a story because we simply cannot help people we don't understand. So part of this conference, part of our exchange, has to help us understand the realities of the people we want to help. We have to be able to understand them. We have to be able to see them for who they are. As we said earlier, we have to have a couple of C's. The first C that I think we have to have is we have to have a commitment. What are we committed to? And this commitment that I see myself committed to, student success, pushes me to understand the experiences of foster youth. Though I myself have not been a foster youth, I must understand as best I possibly can their social realities, because otherwise I will never be able to help them well. In fact, Parker Palmer in a book wrote once, if you want to teach them, it's called The Courage to Teach, which is actually my second C. So the first one's commitment, the second is courage. Parker Palmer in his book called The Courage to Teach says if you ever want to teach them, you've got to be able to see them. You cannot teach them if you cannot see them clearly. And the real problem with that is he said that we look at most people through a glass darkly. Just enough to understand that they exist. Just enough to understand they are foster youth. But we don't understand them well enough. And the problem with that, for those of us who are in the social work or the helping professions, is this, that one, we can't help those we don't understand, but also our solutions will always be only partly effective, if not ineffective, because they will be based on only a partial understanding of the problem, an incomplete analysis of the problem. I told you I'm full of stories and data. So I met a student in one of our studies who talked about a roommate conflict. And the roommate conflict is between a black guy and a white guy, and it happens at a southern, predominantly white institution. So most people who hear that say, oh, stop right there, I already know what it is, it's racism. And it probably was, and it probably is. But there's also another problem. People say, well, tell me more about their conflict. And the problem is that one roommate is clean, and the other roommate is nasty and dirty. And people say, oh, stop, I know what it is, it's about cleanliness. And it might be mixed with racism, but there's another problem. This African-American male who's tall, taller than me, not hard to do. You know that from this whole entire morning. If you know nothing else, I'm short, right? He's tall, 6'1", brown eyes, like the size of quarters, very like rich brown. When you look at them, you can see the brown reflecting off the light. He says to me in this interview, he says, I had this conflict, and at some point, he says to me, but my adopted parents who dropped me off at college, stop, adopted parents. He's mentioning adopted parents. This was a study I conducted on black men at predominantly white institutions, and all of a sudden, this young man's disclosing to me he's out of the foster care system. And that's why categorical definitions don't really work in this country. Because here I am studying black men, and over there I'm studying foster youth, but little did I know right here I'm studying foster youth. And at all times, we're engaging multiple dimensions of identity, multiple dimensions of difference. If the conference doesn't do anything, it ought to move us out of those categorical understandings of people. So this young man says, my adopted parents were the one who dropped me off to college. And I say, wait, so tell me more about what it was like for you growing up. And he starts telling about his adopted parents, but he also tells him about his foster parents. There are 3 sets of these, because you move through foster homes. And what's interesting is whenever we meet people, we say things like, so tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What's the answer to that question for that student? Tell me about your family. What's the answer to that question for that student? And those of us who are in helping professions ought to have the cultural competence and the knowledge, if for no other reason than because of this conference around community engagement, to start examining the questions. What are the assumptions that we're making when we ask, tell me about your family? What does family mean? And why is it always singular? And should it be? And what's the language? What's the script? How does it need to be changed or reworked in order for us to really have an effective conversation that's not offensive, that doesn't marginalize people, right? But one that's really grounded in this deeper, richer understanding of people. And so he says to me, yes, I had 3 foster parents, and the problem is his second set of foster parents, the foster dad smoked. And one day, in a fit of rage, the foster dad burned the young man with a cigarette. And as a result, he's always had a sort of visceral reaction to the smell of smoke. Here's the answer to the question about the roommate conflict. The roommate is not only white, the roommate is not only from a different region of the country, the roommate smokes. And that is the source of the conflict between the two. But the housing department who doesn't think about it that way will think this is simply racism. And we don't tolerate racism at most educational institutions. It's like, you know what, you got to get over it. You got to have the conversation, talk to each other. Work across your racial differences, but it's not a racial difference only. They would say things like, well, people from the North don't talk like people from the South, but it's not about a slang or a dialect. There's actually a deeper cause that actually probably needs a little bit more than just a RA managing it. But someone who's out of our professions, a counselor, someone who can get to the deeper root of the problem, because if the solution is based on a partial understanding of the problem, it will always be ineffective. If nothing else, the conference got to bring us to a point where we can understand that. And that doesn't mean we have to despair and say, oh my gosh, this is so complicated that it'll never get fixed. No, it will get fixed because all of us are committed to the cause of fixing it. But the other thing we have to do is we have to have courage. So for me, I think this starts to connect with some of the things that are happening in the country. There's so much going on in the country nowadays. There are headlines everywhere about the death of black men. And it's problematic to me because I'm a black male. It's problematic to me because my son's a black male. And people joke all the time. And sometimes I find myself complicitous in that. I'll joke. The other day I cracked a joke. I said to someone, actually it was a church. I was speaking at a church and I said, we were talking about something that would likely get me locked up. And I said, that's why I won't do that. Because I will get locked up, and I don't want to be locked up. And then I jokingly said, and nowadays, I may not even get locked up, I'm probably just going to get killed by the cop who pulls me over for that reason. And that's actually quite sad. It's actually quite scary. It's why, despite the fact that I've been able to hold your attention for over 40-some minutes now, when a cop pulls up beside me or behind me in my car, I go to pieces. I have no problem speaking relatively fluently in most settings, except when cops pull me over. When cops pull me over, I literally have to look at my ID to remember my name because I'm so deathly afraid of what's about to happen. And the cop could be pulling me over to give me a kiss in the mouth, and you know what? I probably would die before they'd be able to do it because I'm so afraid of cops. And I'm not afraid of cops because cops are taller, because not every cop in this country is taller than me. I'm afraid of cops because cops misuse and misabuse power. And not all cops, because not all cops are bad. I met one who's a good cop. In fact, my dad was once a cop. But the fact that we have some cops who show up in headlines like this has started to shape my perception of cops. But I got to admit that to you and to myself, because now I can control it. I can control the stereotype now that I know it's part of me. So when people say, hi, I'm a cop, I don't say, right? Because that's really rude to do when people say hi to you. But rather, I sit there and I manage my reaction. But I love it. Most people laugh when I say that. But the reality is, so many people in this country, in their minds, do that every day. When you meet someone and you shake their hand, the person says, hi, I'm gay. I once met a person who's a social worker in this state who said to me, Dr. Strayhorn, I'm so proud of the work you're doing in your center right now and gay people because we got to fix those folks. And what I wanted to say was, I'm actually not Dr. Strayhorn, I'm your supervisor and you're fired, right? Because people in social work can't act like that. If no one is accepting of people, people in social work must be. If no one looks and works across difference, people in social work must be. It's called social work for a reason. Without the social interaction, you don't have work. And it's not just being social, it's work. So it's going to take work. It may mean that you will have to get outside of your preconceived notions of people who are from poor neighborhoods, people who are living with HIV. My mom is a public health nurse, and I remember growing up hearing her talk about her clients and how she treated people living with HIV and AIDS. And she would bring things home and all sorts of stereotypes that I started to dismantle and unpack because of my mom's candid conversations with me about ordinary people who are living with HIV and AIDS. And that people in this room, people in social work, must be able to work across all of these dimensions of identity, all of these differences, fluently, not nervously. And the fact of the matter is, if you pause in your head and scream and run like I just did and then come back, we can tell. It's like when I meet people, I open a book chapter I wrote talking about when I love that I have the fortunate pleasure of being built like this, the fun size, because it challenges most people's perceptions. Someone today, I'm not even going to call you out actually, said today, you look taller in your picture. I love that. I don't even know what that means. How do I look taller in a picture? It's just my headshot. I mean, but people look at it and they say, he's supposed to be tall. And then I walk in and they look at me and they're like, and in my head I'm saying, I saw you do that. And it's absolutely okay. Because we all have perceptions. But once you know you have them, you've got to manage them. You have to control them. Because it actually gets in the way sometimes of us being able to help. Us bringing about the kind of change that we want. And what we wouldn't want to do is be in this profession and start to oppress and marginalize the very same people that we are designed and built to help. This is why I think it's not just commitment, it's going to take courage. We're going to have to be comfortable questioning ourselves, questioning our behaviors, questioning our practices. I was at Franklin County Children's Services doing a professional development, and I told them, I said, who's the newcomer here? The newcomer here, you've got to question everything. I'm not saying it's your responsibility, I'm saying you have the opportunity. And it's a great opportunity to be a newcomer, because you get to question everything, at least for about a year and a half. And the way you do it is you say things like, I'm sorry, I'm new. Do we always do it this way? There you go, there's a script for you to use, right? And it's great when it's a real question, like you're just confused, but it's also a great way to fight for social justice. When the conversation starts to proceed in a direction that categorizes someone based on some social identity like race, you can say things like, I'm sorry, remember I'm new. Do we always deny the black people this service, but we give it to the other family? I'm just trying to figure it out. I want to make sure I do it the right way. So I just noticed how we always talk about the women this way, but we never talk about men this way. So I'm just trying, is that the way we do it here? And just simply asking the question and stopping. You've interrupted oppression. You've interrupted the discourse. And as a result of it, all of us who are pre-existing have to wrestle with that. And that's the work that we all are called to do, to wrestle with this. Social justice is not easy. I love it when people start using that term. I used to reject it, now I embrace it because it is real. We are all in this work. I hope for ultimately social work ought to lead to social justice. And social justice is changing the material conditions of people. Families ought to be stronger as a result of the work we do. Young people ought to be happier in life as a result of what we do. A national opinion poll of social workers asks for, what are the things that you are in this profession trying to do? The top 3 answers on that national opinion poll of social workers is, the things that I value most about my job is, first of all, gainful employment and a competitive salary. Second, satisfaction with life. Third, happiness. That's fine as answers. That's for an opinion poll. My challenge there is, how in the world does a country full of social workers, their top 3 things have everything to do with themselves? It's called social work for a reason. I'm not picking on you because I count myself as a social worker. the things that we ought to be fighting for ought to be, yes, sure, we should have competitive salaries, but you know, the average salary for social workers in this country is about $41,000. By the way, there are differences by race and gender, which is interesting, because race matters, even in social work. People of color are paid less than white folks who are social workers, and why? Even when you control for years of experience, and there are lots of studies on this, that's why this conference is really important. What are we doing to eliminate those racial differences, those gender differences? But even in social work, the top 3 things have everything to do with the individual. It doesn't say, the things I really want is I want families to be stronger, I want communities to be revitalized, I want less young people to go to jail and more to go to college. I think those are the kind of outcomes we ought to do. But to get there, we got to question the current practices, question the current policies, question our own selves. And this conference, I think, was designed to give us an opportunity to reflect and to do that. So try it out. If you're not already keeping a log of the questions, try it out all day long. What can I do differently? What can we do differently? How does this policy or practice impact people differently? Those are the kinds of questions that it will take courage for us to ask, but also we will have to learn how to have the courage to fight for social justice. I don't think it's going to be easy because social justice takes courage. Courage is, to me, an existential power. It means that one has the courage to act even in the face of fear. Courage in the absence of fear is not courage. You know, it's courageous. I'm afraid of big dogs. If I walk out in front of a big dog, that's courageous, because I'm afraid of big dogs. But if I walk outside and there's no big dog there, that's not courageous. I'm just walking. Right? It's in the face of our fears. And we fear a lot of things, not just big dogs. We fear these kind of conversations. We fear different. So we have to sometimes have the courage to step out, take a risk, have the conversation, ask the question, even when we don't even know what the answer is. And to me, that's really important for those in social work for a couple of reasons. One, I've already said, you can't fix what you can't face, but it also, courage is connected to love. And how many people in here love people? I'm going to ask again. Yeah, this is a really important question. How many of you in here love people? And if you don't, I would put in my notes for later, am I in the right field? Because you simply cannot help people you don't love. You can't lead people you don't love. And love is not intimacy. Love, care about, be able to step in, empathize with their situation. So it seems like a really silly question, really light, playful kind of question, but it's a really serious question. If you don't love people, you can't lead them, you can't help them, because you'll never reach out to help people that you don't care about. You'll let them suffer, because love is what calls you to social justice. Now, I sound a little bit like what Cornel West wrote in his book about this, and he put in his book about what race matters, this quote I want to show you. To be human, you must bear witness to justice. Justice is what love looks like in the public. I remember the first time I read that, I thought, I don't know what Cornel was talking about, but now I do, that justice is what love looks like. And so we in this room have to love people, because we can't lead or help those we don't love. How many people in here are okay being a servant? I know, it's charged language, isn't it? But we got to ask ourselves about that. How do you feel about that? Because if you're in social work, I would argue that you are you're in service to other people. In service to other people. And you simply cannot lead people that you do not love. And it's not about the salvific kind of saving that we talk about. It's not that people are lost, but we can't save people that we are not willing to serve. So you got to ask yourself these kinds of questions. So to me, the questions I leave you with are things like, why am I here? Not just at this conference. Why am I in this field? What led me here? Where am I going? At the individual level, and then also at the collective level. Why are we all here? Where are we all going? And then a very important question is, what do we need to get where we're going? And part of that is we need the commitment, we need to recommit. I love these kinds of conferences. It's often a time for people to recommit to what they first came into the profession for. For those who are newcomers to the profession, maybe not even yet in the profession, it's an opportunity for you to recommit to why you came here. Recommit to why you came to graduate school. Recommit to why you started to go into social work. People say to me all the time, I don't want to go into education because education, you can't make money. Mostly these are younger folks. And I used to not discuss this because my mom told me growing up, you don't discuss politics, religion, or money with people. And, you know, I'm an adult, so my mom can't tell me what to do anymore. So, except that you're recording this, so I'm joking, right? But, so now I talk about it candidly, that in fact, you can make money in any field. Because people pay for passion. People pay for change. So if you are a social worker who's committed and courageous and working to create social justice that leads to change, people will pay you for it. They'll bring you to their agency. They'll lead you. They'll promote you to director. They'll give you the resource. If you are a person who's known for making change and you're passionate about the change that you're making, people pay for it. And despite the fact that we are about to grow to 390 million people in this country, and we have lots of different kinds of people in this country, we still always prefer the original. If I told you I sounded like Beyonce, people are not going to bring me to lead the concert. They want Beyonce. I can dance and pop like her all I want. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. We still want the real thing. And the reality is the same is true for you. So people who say, well, I don't want to enter social work because you can't make money, simply not true. But you also have many other non-monetary benefits of entering this profession. The question is, what are they for you? What are they for us? What are we who teach telling the next generation of social workers that the rewards are? What success look like for them? Those are the kinds of questions we have to play with. And then, most importantly, if race really does matter, what are we going to do about that? How can we make sure that the next generation and the current generation of social workers don't do things and make assumptions about people based on their race? So for me, that's pretty personal because it's where I close. About 2 years ago, November 23rd, I lost my last living grandparent, my maternal grandparent. Creola Evelyn Warner is what she was born. I call her affectionately Ma. She's my mom's mom. My mom is my #1 fan, as she says now, but when my grandma was living, they used to fight about this. And my grandma would say, no, I got more of his stuff posted on my wall than you do, so that makes me the #1 fan. I love the fact that my maternal grandmother took such great pride in what I was doing. My maternal grandmother, it was fine up until about November 3rd, where she suffered an aneurysm, a very strong aneurysm. And as a result, I watched my 88-year-old grandmother go from eating at P.F. Chang's to being in a hospital, saying nothing, mumbling, talking to people who were no longer even alive and had been dead for 20 years. And so when I flew from Columbus to the hospital to be with my last living grandparent, stayed by the bed and watched her during the night, listened to her conversations with her dead mom and her dead father and her dead brothers and sisters, and laughing and giggling, and talking to people in the room who I didn't see present. I started understanding the complexity of the problems that we face in this society, that a simple aneurysm can take a person who was teaching. My grandmother taught 55 years in the public school system. She was 88 years old. The last picture we had of her was her eating at P.F. Chang's with sunglasses on and what she calls her big dress, but it's simply a sundress, right? Looking beautiful and divine. And then overnight, my grandmother's now speaking in ways that are unintelligible and actually not talking to people who are present in the room, and she's laying in the bed. And by the time I arrived to the hospital, my mom was giving me an update on my grandma and what's going on with her. And so I know that my grandmother won't know me. I know I'll walk in, she won't say anything to me. So as I'm flying there, I remember lots of memories about my grandmother. One thing I remember is I was about 6 years old, so I told you I'm a choir director. I got it honestly. My grandmother was a choir director of the children's choir, her church, Free Will Baptist Church, and so she directed the choir. And I was a member of her choir when I was growing up. And my grandmother taught me this song called There's a Bright Side Somewhere. The song simply says, there's a bright side somewhere. There's a bright side somewhere. Don't you give up until you find it. There's a bright side somewhere. I remember the words of that song my entire life. My grandmother taught it to me. So when I walk into the hospital and she looks at me and she doesn't recognize me, it breaks my heart because that's my maternal grandmother's, my last living grandparent. I stay there in the bed listening to her talk. And one night, she died on November 23rd. It would have been the 21st. It was about 1:30 something in the morning. I'm sitting in the chair asleep, and my grandmother's in the bed asleep. In the middle of the night, my grandmother says, "Rail." And I look at my grandmother, and I'm thinking something happened, like, for my Christian faith, God has worked miraculously in the room, and my grandmother's going to come back, and she's going to be teaching tomorrow. Because she just said my name. My entire life, she's called me Rail. So I look at her, look in her face, I'm like, "Ma?" And she looks at me and she says, "There's a bright side somewhere." She remembers our song. It's 1:30 in the morning, visiting hours are over, you're not supposed to make noise, but I can't help myself. So I started singing with her, because she always sang like the soprano part, I still would harmonize in alto. "There's a bright side somewhere. Don't you give up until you find it. There's a bright side somewhere." And then it's gone. 7 days later, my grandmother dies. I never heard my name. I never heard the song after that night at 1:30. The reason why I think that's a really important point to remember is because I hold every single memory of that song, every single memory of my grandmother in my heart. Social work must empathize with people. Social workers can't judge people. People can judge people, but social workers can't. Social workers must be committed to change. And no matter what, on your darkest day, on your hardest day, when you're frustrated, and I met a social worker today who said, "I was on 315 and there was traffic, and I understand there's traffic for me, but even on our worst day, we must not allow our circumstances to get in the way of us helping people, because people need help." That's why we came into this profession. People need us to not judge them, because we can't fix what we don't face. We can't help who we don't love. We can't do any of those kind of things. We've got to use conferences like this to start to own some of the stuff that we have, so that we can make sure that we help people. That even on our darkest day, my grandmother had it right my entire life, that there is a bright side somewhere. That's the message we got to tell families, that despite poverty, there's a bright side somewhere. That despite growing up in foster youth and having multiple places, there's a bright side somewhere, and we cannot give up until we find it. The purpose of the conference has to bring about consensus. It has to bring about change, because that's what people really want. Thank you.